So it's exciting to be in the center of make-believe at the Goodman Theater because I was a kid who played dress up. I was a kid who had entire Barbie communities with whole life stories in my bedroom. I wore wacky outfits to picture day. I organized productions for my neighborhood and even wrote and directed an annual family Christmas pageant. And so my entree into social entrepreneurship wasn't that different. It was another venture into make-believe and imagination, and most of all, bringing people together through the arts. And it was all inspired by one person. This is Kelsey. Kelsey is my cousin. She was born 3 months after me, but after a really traumatic birth and a slew of medical issues, right at her first days of life, her parents were told to take her home and make her comfortable. But Kelsey was a miracle kid. She survived those first days, a stroke at the age of 3, and hospital visits that outnumbered even my Barbie collection. But as she grew up, she continued to thrive, and even though she had these significant disabilities that limited her ability to walk and talk, she was always just my cousin and my friend and a person who I loved spending time with. She was there at every family party, every event. We went to amusement parks, rode roller coasters. And I learned through Kelsey that people with disabilities didn't need our pity, they needed to be included. My mom recalls a story of a time when Kelsey and I were both around 3, and I was running around the backyard with my cousins while Kelsey laid on a blanket with her mom, bouncing a koosh ball up and down. And my mom looked at her sister and said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Kelsey will never be able to do the things Micaela can do." And her sister looked at her and she said, "Are you crazy? Kelsey is having just as much fun in this moment as Micaela is running around." So just because people with disabilities experience the world differently, they don't experience it any less. And as I got older, I became more aware of the issues that faced kids with disabilities. When I got to high school, I remember as a freshman noticing the lunch table hierarchy. And when you walked into the cafeteria, the coolest seniors sat way far back by the windows. And as you moved closer towards the doors, the grades got younger with the freshmen closest to you. But then, even beyond the freshmen, sat the students with disabilities, completely alone. And the cafeteria was basically the only place I even saw students with disabilities. They didn't ride the bus with the rest of us. They had separate classes, separate teachers, weren't at football games, no school dances, and I never, ever saw kids with disabilities in the room where I spent most of my time, the auditorium. So, as a sophomore, I visited my high school principal and said I wanted to do this thing, a show that brought together kids of all abilities. We would call it Unified Theater, and because there weren't faculty available to advise the group, we would just put on a show ourselves. A few weeks later, I found myself sitting in my parents' living room with 20 or so kids with and without disabilities, some who I knew, most who I didn't, getting ready to do this thing. I told them I didn't have much planned and that we would have to write our own show because we couldn't actually afford rights to buy a production. And as we sat in the room, we brainstormed, and this young woman, Lauren, 9/11 had recently happened, and Lauren said, "How about we do the 1960s? She was inspired by this concept of peace and freedom and social activism and the whole experience brought on by the war in her eyes. And I sat there as Lauren, who had a disability herself, had each student in the room hanging on her every word. And it was so clear, even in those first moments, that any barrier created by our differences of abilities were completely dissolved. At our first rehearsal, a dad brought his daughter to the door, and he asked me where her buddy was. Buddy? I was so confused. But then I quickly realized that every single other organization out there that brought together kids with and without disabilities did so based on some sort of buddy or partnership model. We were beyond institutionalization for and segregation of people with disabilities, but when they were included, it was always as a special other needing our help. To me, that didn't make sense. To my teenage mind, it just was unfathomable. We didn't need another label. I had read the Scarlet Letter. I had been the tallest girl in every single class photo. And I realized the last thing teenagers needed was another way of being singled out as an other. So at Unified Theater, we decided to do inclusion a bit differently. We rejected any sort of buddy model, any sort of tokenism, and we were kids. And sure, we made some mistakes, we hit some roadblocks, we had to work through things, but we were united and having an absolute ball. Then it was curtain time, and by curtain, I mean a teeny tiny choir room with a tie-dye sheet taped to the wall. And at the show, I peeked out the windows and saw all these people. It was busting at the seams with over 200 community members, really curious to see what this group of kids of all abilities was going to put on for the community. And it turns out we were onto something. That relatively haphazard first show launched an organization we called Unified Theater, Other schools came and asked if I would help them stage similar productions in their schools. At 15, with the help of a lawyer who had kids that went to my school, I incorporated Unified Theater into a not-for-profit and slowly helped other schools get these similar programs going. When I graduated college in 2009, I moved back to my hometown of Hartford, Connecticut, and committed full-time to seeing if Unified Theater, if we really had something there. And it seems we did. We now have an organization based on 3 simple concepts from that first show: empower teens to lead, let creativity rule, and put the spotlight on ability. We've experienced tremendous growth over the last 3 years. Over 4,000 students with and without disabilities have participated in our shows. Nearly 10,000 audience members have witnessed the power of inclusion from Connecticut to California. We have a waiting list longer than our staff and funding can support. And our impact has been seen in students both with and without disabilities. For over half of our students, it is the first time they have participated in an inclusive activity, the first time they've ever really interacted with someone of different abilities. For 1 in 5, it's the first after-school activity they've ever participated in. 87% say it improves their self-confidence. 84% say it promotes tolerance in their schools and communities. And these are statistics that are for both kids with and without disabilities. When inclusion happens, it can't just benefit one group. It has to be focused on benefiting all and bringing everyone together. Over the last year, we've placed a particular emphasis on participation by schools and students identified as at risk. A big tool in closing the achievement gap is getting students identified as at risk involved in after-school activities. But once you get to middle school and high school, the idea of joining an after-school activity is a little bit daunting. You might not have had the experience. You haven't had piano lessons for years. You haven't danced for years. You never learned how to play soccer. So those kids are sent to Unified Theater. And we've seen tremendous impact. Not just that they're doing theater, but this idea of inclusion, where for the first time, these students feel like they have something to offer someone else. For the first time, they feel engaged in their community. They're able to express themselves, and they're in control of their own outcomes. But perhaps the most exciting part of this growth over the last 3 years is that we're still the same model that 20 kids came up with in my living room. We still create quirky, haphazard productions that the kids select every element themselves. It's still this model of inclusion that rejects any sort of hierarchical, tokenistic partnership, and we're still an organization led by teens, for teens. Unified Theater definitely began with Kelsey and I, and that relationship inspires me every single day. But last Monday, I sat in Hartford, Connecticut for the kickoff of our fall student leader training season, where 200 students from across the state of Connecticut received training to implement Unified Theater productions in their schools. And I looked out there and I realized Unified Theater is not about Kelsey and I anymore. These students own the movement. These students are creating change in their communities. They're driving inclusion forward. They're fostering new perspectives on diversity. And they're making change through the arts. And to me, I think that's the greatest hope, the ultimate goal, the biggest dream of a social entrepreneur, to create something that's bigger than you, that lasts longer than you, that reaches out from you, and creates this domino effect of change that makes the lives of people, many who you may never even meet yourself, a little bit brighter. Thank you so much.